Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining the CannAtlantic Cannabis Conference, the country's first Mid-Atlantic Cannabis Conference, brought to you by the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. If you're watching, this session is a very important and a very big discussion topic within both the cannabis legalization movement and the current movements that we're seeing stemming from the uprisings. This session is about the intersection of the cannabis legalization movement and the abolish police movement, and where these two movements intersect. Where do they support each other, and what can cannabis advocates, activists, consumers, and those who are just interested about the movement in the industry, where do they find the space in the movement to abolish police, and what does that conversation look like? I'm joined by two prominent activists and people in the space, people who have experience not only addressing and talking about police brutality and police violence, but also have had experience creating policy and doing community advocacy and organizing to address police violence towards Black and Brown communities. I'm joined by Naomi Isaac of Marijuana Justice, based out of Richmond, Virginia, and I'm joined by Shekia Scott, the former Director of Equity Programming and Community Outreach for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Mission up in Massachusetts. And Shekia will be joining us from Philadelphia here. I'm going to bring on the panelists as well to bring them on. Thank you both for joining me and having this conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
So we're going to talk about this really big discussion here about the intersection. But before we even talk about the intersection of cannabis and the movement to abolish police, can we first just get the definition for you? What does abolition mean for you, and what does abolishing the police mean for you? So we'll start with Naomi. Can you give us kind of your definition and your take on this?
Yeah, so when we're talking about abolition, it's a couple things, right? So it's firstly a political vision that seeks to build a society that imagines ways for us to be able to address harm and conflict beyond the means of punishment and incarceration. But beyond that, it's also a rising political consciousness, right? Abolitionists like to look at violence and harm and say, let's get to the root and chop off what is parasitic to the human condition. And so I think abolition versus reform concerns itself with two premises, which is first, that there is a strong white racial capitalism in this world that has structured itself through institutions of punishment. And then second, that capitalists have really created crime as a mechanism in order to sustain those institutions. So as abolitionists and feminists and Afrofuturists, we aren't just primarily concerned necessarily with abolishing police or prisons, but rather promoting the cause of Indigenous sovereignty and Black liberation. And so our struggle really is not just for the absence of prisons or policing again, but the presence of new infrastructure and building these social networks and institutions that aren't only structured through the ways that we can, commit violence against people, assert our domination, or dispose of people. Yeah, and so when I say abolish the police, I'm mostly talking about a reinvestment in building systems of care, and also building the foundation for Black people and other marginalized communities to have self-determination.
Shekia?
Wow. I mean, like, how do you add on to that? That I feel like just encompasses everything in terms of abolition. And I think to simplify it as well, and just to say everything Naomi just said in a different way, is just reimagining again and bringing a complete end to one way of policing. And I think abolishing the police is much bigger than police officers and police departments. It's the entire carceral state and those institutions that work to punish people instead of repair what leads to what we would think in our society criminal behavior. So it's not, like Naomi said, just an end to policing. and shifting away, but completely redoing the ideology behind public safety at all levels and what that looks like for everyone, and not continuing to reform what used to be our slave state. And so I think abolition of the police is a continuation of the abolition of slavery. And we didn't completely abolish slavery when we did. We abolished the ownership of people, but we didn't in the carceral state. And so that continued. And I think it's just us saying, oh, we left that piece out and let's get rid of it now and reimagine what this looks like going forward.
And to segue into, now that we've had the definitions, so to speak, laid out on what the terminology and really the overall direction means, where does this all connect with the broader movement for legalizing cannabis? Everyone has a different perspective, obviously, of what legalizing cannabis means. Everyone does have a different viewpoint on the outcomes that cannabis legalization should bring. But where does the call for abolishing police kind of fit into some of the different narratives that we're seeing within the cannabis legalization movement? I'll open that up to both of y'all.
I'll kick it off. So I think, it goes hand in hand with the war on drugs, right? And when we're thinking of who are the agents of the war on drugs, those are our policing institutions. And when I'm saying policing institutions, I'm including court systems, I'm including military personnel. It's much broader than your police officers that are responding to your 911 calls. It's so much deeper than that. And so when we're talking about where those two intersect, it's with the high criminalization of those that we've seen more predominantly in the Nixon era, but it started before that, where it targeted certain communities in Black, African American, Mexican at that time, Latinx, Latino communities the most, but it was a harsh crime penalties for drugs. And when we're criminalizing people, we're bringing in our institutions of policing to then punish them. And so that carries a lot of, baggage and turmoil and trauma that intersects with then legalizing something that was illegal. And so, that's really the basis of it, connecting it to the war on drugs and then who were the agents of the crimes done. And I don't mean those people who were selling the drugs or trafficking them or using them either. I mean the officers who were committing crimes against communities, to further promote an agenda of who these communities were, and then later down the line, looking to legalize that same drug or product and leave those people behind. So it intersects beginning there at the war on drugs and looking at who the perpetrators of that were.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 100%. And I don't have much to add other than, when we think about marijuana, they say it's a gateway drug, but what it really is a gateway drug to mass incarceration. So when we're trying to talk about abolishing the police and the steps that we need to take to start to dismantle the prison industrial complex, like Shekia touched on, we can't talk about abolition without talking about cannabis reform and ending the prohibition on marijuana. And also deciding that, maybe human behavior doesn't need to be criminalized. And if we believe that someone poses a danger to themselves or someone else, we can ask ourselves how we can change their material conditions and then do what we can to fund those solutions.
Thank you for that. In terms of consumers, cannabis patients, broader advocates who are part of the cannabis movement, how can advocates learn some of the vernacular and some of the ideals and philosophies that shape up abolition, the abolition movement, and incorporate those into their work while they're pushing to legalize cannabis? How do they incorporate that? How do they get comfortable with that? And what are some ideas or suggestions that you give people and viewers who are watching this? And that's for everybody.
Okay. I say the first thing is to ask yourself, or to say the thought out loud to yourself: what happens if we abolish the police, right? And then deal with whatever comes up when you say that out loud to yourself, right? Some people are like, that's completely impossible. Find out why you think that's impossible. And once you start doing that undigging, you'll become uncomfortable, but you'll become more comfortable in it. And I think that's, a personal way where people just need to find, or get in tune with certain things that are out of their imagination at any time. So I would start there. But there's also the fact that abolition isn't a new idea. It's not. It's been around forever. There's been abolitionists in other avenues, as I talked about earlier, the abolition of slavery, right? There's been abolitions of different things. And so you can start looking back on that, getting ideas from that. Angela Davis is the author of Our Prisons Abolished, I think it's called. I'm sorry if that's not the proper title, but very close. So if you look it up, you'll find that. And just, talk to people who are getting there to that mind frame, or already there, and just feel it out. You don't have to be an expert on abolition. You can kind of just understand the idea of it and start from there.
Absolutely. Abolition and becoming an abolitionist is all about a dedication to like studying and growing and building, right? And so I think after you start to be really interrogative, asking yourself these questions and question everything, because remember, we have been indoctrinated by a white society whose interest is in the capitalist system. So we're going to have to start to unlearn some of this propaganda. So once we start asking those questions and unlearning, then we need to start making commitments to building up the systems of care that we need to see. And the way that we build that commitment and show solidarity is by, really having community discussions and centering the most marginalized, vulnerable communities at the center of legalizing cannabis. Because as we're talking about abolishing the prison industrial complex, we also have to discuss abolishing the medical industrial complex, which is also a carceral system, and serves to oppress, the disabled and those who are neurodivergent further in society. And it also, wow, sorry, I got distracted, y'all. And it serves to further disable further oppress neurodivergent people, as well as further disable other people who are seen as disposable in our community, such as trans people, such as elderly people, who are the fastest growing population in our prisons. So, we have to start to center the most impacted and those who are facing the most violence, and not only just studying scholars, academics, community organizers, really listening to the experiences and solutions crafted by the people who have been harmed the most.
Well said. Well said. And everyone starts in a different position, and not everyone. We're all continuously learning. We're all continuously educating ourselves, and so it really resonates with me, because I even myself, I'm learning a lot. I am starting to understand and trying to engage and incorporate a lot of the viewpoints and bringing that to the table and questioning, and really questioning. Why certain people react or feel a certain way, without kind of thinking about what are the better outcomes, what are the better ways that we can imagine some of these solutions that often aren't really brought to the public's attention, even though they are trying to be worked at a community level. And so this kind of brings into this next question, is that this conference is part of working with people who focus on media, who are journalists, who are content creators, who are media entrepreneurs, to really tell people and empower viewers and other people to tell their stories and tell their narratives. But often we see in commercial and mainstream media coverage that there's sometimes a confusion on how the media frames or portrays the abolish police movement, or frames and portrays abolition itself. And so for both of you, what do you often kind of see in the media what does the media get wrong when they're trying to cover the movement to abolish police? And how can that be corrected so that people are actually getting the right information from these institutions that hold a whole lot of sway over the public consciousness? I'll open that question to both of you.
I think it's exactly what Naomi just said. It's centering the voices of those who are actually impacted the most. And why I say that is because it's sad to think about, but when you think about your life and us three, where African American, Black, we're from those backgrounds. 99% of the images that you've seen on TV up until this point in your life have been white males or have been from the white male perspective, because when you think about media, you have to think about those who own the media, and what narratives they are going to allow in their showrooms or their newsrooms, what topics or language they're going to allow to be used. And so it's really about being honest with where your bias is when you're reporting. And that's very hard for people because they're indoctrinated, right? We're all indoctrinated to a certain level. And so if the voices who are not impacted are speaking, then most of the times the story is not going to be told in the right way. And there's a famous quote about it. I don't want to get it wrong. So we have to tell our own stories. I think it starts there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the most important thing. As someone who's covering media, who's following the stories, don't just capitalize off of Black suffering, correct the narrative with your platform. When we're talking about mass incarceration, again, talk about who's most impacted. We have the majority of people who are killed by police officers are people with disabilities. The fastest growing, like I said, demographic of people in our prison populations are those who are 55 and older. Those who are most likely to be killed while Black are going to be trans people, so we have to start to correct the narrative, but with our platform and really take back, the lies that the white media has told to help prop up the myth of European and white supremacy. We have to be bold and we have to be honest. And sometimes being truthful is a hard thing in media, especially when you're depending on it for your income or you're depending on it for advancement, but you just have to be honest and you have to make a commitment to the people rather than to the profit.
I want to add one quick thing, and make a commitment to not criminalizing things that are predominantly led or representing Black, African American, Hispanic, Latinx. I don't like to say the word minority, and that's why I say think about language that you say, because minority is kind of like subjugating yourself to second level, but groups that are not white, and so you don't want to automatically criminalize them, and I think that's what I see majority of the time in the media about abolition, about anything having to do with rights for those disproportionately impacted on all levels. It's always about criminalizing it first, and then later down the line maybe being like sorry or never saying sorry at all, and just keeping the story going like that.
Yeah, the apologies are few and far between.
Right.
We see, and as I recognize within the media industry, there's very little accountability, which is why I really appreciate the work that also, Marijuana Justice does with holding media accountable too, because those narratives go deep. Those narratives really go deep.
Yeah.
Let's dream a little bit in terms of if the police were abolished, if there is now space on, city budgets, county budgets, where there are no police, or at least money is not being put into police pockets. Where should that go as it relates to cannabis? Where should some of that, money or funding and investment, where can that go in the overall larger scheme of cannabis legalization? I'll start with you, Shekia, on that one.
It should go directly to the people that were in jail, arrested, incarcerated, that are still there, and their families. And I don't think that we put a policy behind what they do with it. give it back to the people. Like, and I'm not saying go outside, throw money in the air. No, I'm saying reparations in terms of the debt that you have caused this person to be in their lives, and not just the debt of their time in prison, the debt of missing opportunities, employment opportunities, educational opportunities, opportunities with their families, opportunities to provide and help their family reach another level, and their family struggling outside of them being in the system. So give the money back, give it back to them, and and like Naomi said earlier, let them speak for what needs to be done with it. And I'm not, someone who's going to say I have all the ideas. No, I want to know where people think this should go. And of course, at the very top of that list for me would be reparations.
Yes, I love it. Give us money back, period.
Period.
Period. Because, like you said, there are white people who are sustaining themselves off the privilege of Black suffering. And so with marijuana justice, we like to condense this, framework of transformative justice to repeal, repair, and reparations. And when we talk about repealing, we mean eliminating criminal and civil penalties for simple possession of controlled substances, and removing penalties for things like possession and intent to distribute. Right? These are abolitionist reforms. When we talk about repair, we're talking about abolishing drug testing, expunging criminal records, ending civil asset forfeiture, investing in evidence-based drug education, and then divesting from racist police and investing in Black communities so that they have the resources to develop their own community-based models of safety based off their own developed community values. And so, and then when we talk about reparations, again, we talk about just paying us in the form of like direct payments to Black people, in the form of healthcare and therapy to help heal from like generational trauma. So I think a lot of the times the media likes to act as if abolitionists haven't really mapped out a pathway for reforms that will not further expand the carceral system, but they exist. They just involve giving control, sovereignty, and autonomy back to Black people. And I think that's why they stand in opposition to it.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about for people who are either new to the abolish police movement or even new to the cannabis legalization movement. Can you just talk about resources? Where can people go to find this information? What books or resources do you recommend? Even podcasts, shout out to podcasts, that you recommend that people can go to continue to learn and really start to kind of piece together the intricacies behind these two movements that, again, I think Shekia, you mentioned, like they're all so intertwined. What resources would you recommend for educational purposes? And I'll open it up to both of y'all.
Yeah, I would say there's so many resources. If you want to start to like listen to academics, like Shekia said, you can read Angela Davis, Our Prison's Obsolete. You can look into Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is an abolitionist geographer, and she'll really break it down to you about, the foundation of prison abolition and how it relates to geography and how our space, place, and time. You can check out 8 to Abolition, and they've set up, 8 quick abolitionist reforms that can be put into place today to help us decarcerate. You can look into Abolition and Disability Justice Collective. They have mapped out a great resource list that just explains some of these buzzwords that you hear often, like transformative justice, reformative justice, and gives you like some context and readings that can help you expand on those theories. You can look into Southerners on the New Ground, which will give you information on the way that prison abolition, policing, and prisons in general affect the trans and gender non-conforming demographic. And you can also look into Critical Resistance, which is an organization that was founded by prison abolitionists, Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore, as well as others. And it's still around today and offers many resources on how to study abolition in earnest. And then quick plug, you can check into Race Capital, because we are always just looking to help people really start to take the first steps into, again, that new political consciousness that so many Black young folks are really ascribing to. So, check out Race Capital. We talk about, some abolitionist theory as well.
Those are all great resources, and thank you for that title of the book, correction. Our prison's obsolete. Thank you. But also, just like when I don't know something, I just Google it real quick. So even those small things of, if you're like, what are they talking about, right? Just plug it in your Google real quick. It's not going to make you feel stupid. Nobody knows. And even if they did, so what? You're learning, you're growing, right? It's just basic things that you can kind of do on top of all of the definite, infinite layers of resources that there are. But I think something else that's really closer in terms of bridging like the war on drugs with the police state and with legalization of cannabis is look up your ACLU in your state, and they publish a lot of documents and research and papers about the war on drugs and numbers and statistics behind arrest rates, incarceration rates, all the way back to like the beginning of the war on drugs. So definitely look into that. That's the American Civil Liberties Union of your state. You could just plug ACLU into Google too, and that will pop up. But I think that's a great resource.
And I also like to mention Drug Policy Alliance with the work that we've been doing. And Cassandra Frederic is now the executive director there. And taking names, kicking butt and taking names as usual. So it's glad to see her leading the charge for that organization, which is very much in this fight as well. This is a big moment. We're at a very pivotal moment where these conversations now, not just about cannabis legalization, but really abolishing police, are now in kind of the more of the public consciousness, so to speak, from a commercial and a mass media perspective now. To wrap this up, what are ways that we can that activists and advocates can kind of ensure that that this movement isn't being co-opted, that this isn't being kind of taken and warped in a way where we sometimes see institutions do performative things to show that they're, all about Black lives, that they're all about, supporting this movement, but really aren't. How can people be aware of these types of performative things, and how can we hold institutions accountable for actually supporting and, walking the walk and talking the talk, so to speak? Naomi, you mentioned, in the work that Marijuana Justice does, you hold media accountable too, but can we talk about just like holding other institutionals accountable for showing up in this moment rather than posting a cute photo on Instagram and calling it a day? I'll open that up to both of y'all.
Well, I don't know if my answer will be liked, but I think there are very few ways to actually hold the institutions like the government accountable, especially right now. We're seeing that, the people, even when we are marching, shouting for over 100 days to demand an end to police brutality, we've only been met with an increase in police brutality. And so I think people have to first, make sure that they are assured in the reality that the police cannot be reformed. And then also understand that the people who benefit from the prison industrial complex, like we talked about, the judges, the prosecutors, the lawyers, you have to understand that they're not working in the politicians and the legislators, right? They're not working themselves out of a job. And so we have to keep that in mind and understand that there must be a diversity of tactics in order to achieve full Black self-determination. But we got to make sure that if we're going to be working within the system, quote unquote, if we're going to be working through policy, that we aren't supporting legislation that's going to expand the carceral state. So that means that making sure that when we're advocating for prison and police reform, we're not just talking about things like body cams or like sit training that only gives more money to the police. We have to be talking about hiring freezes, about disarming. We have to be talking about budget cuts. So all those things, we need to make sure that we are just like very attuned to the reality that there is no reforming the police, and there's also no going back to a time where people are ignorant to that fact. And then we have to start to organize in our communities to build people, to build a political education. So share the things that you learn with the people around you. Talk to your parents. You know, you gotta let them know, what's up, and then talk to your siblings, the descendants, the people who are going to inherit this very political consciousness that we're building, and then organize within your community, crowdsource. See what kinds of bystander intervention programs you all can develop. How can you all skill up together? Because the people in your community have skills to offer. You all go out and we all go out and give our labor away to corporations, and we've developed skills because of that. So how about we take it back, give it to the community, and make sure that we're building ourselves up and skilling ourselves up, because at this time we can't rely wholly on politicians to do the work for us. And it's going to be very hard to hold them accountable, especially under this administration and under another administration that is who has been quite open about the fact that they won't end the expansion of the police state as well. So we have to start to empower ourselves, and we have to be confident in the fact that we can be the ones to do it. We don't always need someone else to be the one advocating on our behalf. We're stronger than we think we are.
Yeah, I was going to say that very last thing is that the first thing that you have to do to not be co-opted is literally not be co-opted. Have the confidence in yourself and in your own community that you're not going to let anyone co-opt your movement, regardless of how powerful they are, how much money they have. Be determined that that's not going to happen, and build up your community and their confidence in that around you, so that you have a stronger front. And you also just have to sometimes be that person that shuts that down, like within your own workplaces, when you're seeing your own company post a picture at the proper time to say Black Lives Matter, and then but inside you're not getting paid what you have to speak up. We have to start with those small things of ourselves too, and not perpetuate the same systems that we want to dismantle because we're fearful. There's not much more I can add on to all of the things Naomi said, so that was my point there.
Naomi Isaac, Shekia Scott, I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time, so I really appreciate you both participating and really just dropping some knowledge and dropping some wisdom, and dropping some great recommendations and resources for people to continue to keep informed and stay informed and continue to educate themselves about this important topic as we look at the convergence of the cannabis movement and the abolish police movement. The last and final question to wrap this all up, what are some good ways for people to either stay in touch with you, to stay connected with you, or to stay in touch or follow the organizations that you're either representing, or if you have, a shout out to an organization that you want people to check out? I know ACLU was mentioned. Feel free to do that here. Naomi, I'll start with you. What would be the best kind of contact information for wherever?
Yeah, so you can follow Marijuana Justice's work at THC Now on THC Justice Now on Instagram. You can follow Race Capital at Race Capital with an O on Instagram. If you want to follow me personally, you can follow me at my personal Instagram, which is Naonce, NAAAYONCE. But I don't post much, so don't post much that is useful. So yeah, that's all for me.
If you would like to see past equity work that I have done for the state of Massachusetts in terms of defining equity for our cannabis legalization, both technically both now, medical and recreational, you can go to the Mass Cannabis site. And it's masscannabiscommission.com. And they have or Mass Cannabis Control Commission and .com. And it's at the top, you can click equity programs and you'll see that there. And if you'd like to follow me personally, I also feel the same. I don't post much that's about solely abolishing the police or a marijuana legalization, but you can follow me on Twitter. And my Twitter name is @_she's that girl.
And I'll make sure that, because this is being recorded, I'll make sure that I drop some links in the chat as well. This is the pre-recorded version of this conversation. For those tuning in, we are going to work to try to get these panelists to join us for a live Q&A just to have some more conversations around this. So if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts about this, please keep dropping those questions into the chat, and we will move to have a live Q&A real quick with Shekia and Naomi. So again, both of y'all, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.